Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Write an Adventure, our ongoing live stream where we are creating a completely custom campaign in real time so that you can see all the pieces and parts, all the thoughts and questions that go into this process. I'm RJ Kerr, your host as usual, and today we are going to be working on some of the complications that go into success as part of our sea shanty siren encounter. Now, if this is your first time joining us, or you haven't watched any of the previous videos, um, let me go ahead and give you a quick recap on what we've done so far, so that you're not lost. So, we are working on creating a custom campaign, as I said, with its own unique domain of dread. And to give us a little bit of structure in this, to make sure that we have kind of all the pieces and parts that we need to tell a really cohesive story, we decided to use the story circle structure as kind of a loose framework to, again, help us kind of define the shape of this campaign. Again, loose framework, it's a framework from which to deviate from, right? So something to start with. Now, we've already done a lot of work in this area here. So we have figured out how our characters are going to enter into this domain of dread through a portal that opens up on the blood moon. We've talked about what kinds of personal motivations would draw them willingly into this portal. We figured out where they're going to land in a shanty town that we're calling Darkport, which sits on the edge of an inland sea. And we figured out that this inland sea is a pretty big part of this domain of dread, that it was once the basin of a thriving metropolis that's now fallen into ruin and been flooded. We've also figured out that the Dread Lord of this domain of dread is an elemental evil that we're calling Ovander, although we're still figuring out exactly how he fits into our overall campaign. We've also figured out the very first adventure, where our first level characters are kidnapped and briefly enslaved and have to escape their captors. And in doing so, learn about the existence of a long lost artifact that gives the wielders some kind of power over the domain of dread. And therefore, it's suggested that it's their best course of action for getting out of this domain with their lives. So now we're working on the part where the characters get proactive, where now they're getting a lot of choices. The world kind of opens up for them, and we're creating a bit of a sandbox for them to play in. Now, to give ourselves a little bit of structure to work with, we're using a node structure style, um, in which we are sort of laying out a series of small adventures or encounters, where we sort of seed with clues for the characters to find. And each one of these clues leads to a different node, a different encounter or adventure. And these nodes, which I frankly prefer to call kind of investigative scenes, I think that captures them a little bit better, um, are here so that our players can kind of go wherever, our characters can kind of go wherever they want, giving them lots of agency, but still giving us as DMs some structure. So we're not having to create everything off the cuff, right? We're not having to do so much work on the fly. And we've done a little bit of work in this area here already. We've started building some of the mini adventures. Now we're working on a complex social encounter, one that is a little bit more than just the typical you meet an NPC, you have a variety of charisma checks to get information out of them, and then you walk away kind of thing. This is something with a little more meat to it. Um, and But still relies heavily on interactions between NPCs and between the player characters. And we're calling this, our working title for it is Sea Shanty Siren, right? And so the situation is that the characters may follow a clue to a siren that's a predatory creature by nature who lures beings to her toll to feast on them, but she's recently developed a problem where her voice has been stolen and she needs to replace it. She's come up with a short list of NPCs that she can get this voice from potentially, and she needs the players, or the characters rather, to go convince that these one of these NPCs to willingly give up their voice. And so we've done a little work in terms of we've created some background information for role playing the siren to kind of give us as DMs a little bit of a little bit more meat to this NPC than we might normally include in an NPC stat block to make the sort of the detailed interactions, the high quality role play that we're trying to put forward a little bit easier. given her an objective, so it's a thing that she wants immediately. We've talked about her ambition, which is what she wants overall. We've given her a couple values that might be conflicting to let the players work with that. We've also given her a secret and a little bit of description. Now, we've also done the same kind of thing for the NPCs that the characters might go talk to try to convince to give up their voice. And we've added a little bit more to that. We've given them we've given each of these NPCs a dilemma. So, uh, effectively, a reason they might want to be willing, what they might be willing to give up their voice, and a reason they may not want to give up their voice. We've also given them some clues that might lead to their secrets to give our players a few more levers. And we've done this for all three of the NPCs that we've come up with. Now, again, we're trying to make this a situation where it's more than just a series of charisma checks, right? It's something that we can role play out in detail, but something where success is not just a glorified skill check, right? Where there is some more challenge to it. We figured out some complications for failure, but we also want to add a little meat to success. And so now we're working on some situations where, you know, there's an that if the characters succeed in convincing somebody to give up their voice, that there's an NPC who's close to that character who gave up their voice, and wants to take action to prevent this contract. They want to get their friend's voice back. And so we're working on some of these encounters and making them kind of varied for each of our NPCs here. Now, we just finished working on the priest, where the priest acolyte, I should say, we've almost finished working on the priest, where the priest acolyte has become aware of this bargain and effectively raises up an angry mob to kind of stop the player characters and attempts to have them burned at the stake for their sins or their sins. So we created a unique monster stat block, unique creature stat block to reflect our idea for a swarm of commoners, a riot that might erupt, and given a little bit of a CR there so that we can utilize these and make it really feel like it's a big angry mob in town. And now we're working on a few special mechanics for that encounter to give it even more flavor. We build out one where we have sort of some divine power this acolyte is able to use to fill the town with mist and make this a little more complicated of an event or of a situation for our player characters who in all likelihood are trying to kind of escape this town with this contract in their lives as opposed to fighting everybody in town, right? So we're kind of building a complicated, well, I won't say complicated, we're building um, a more dynamic chase scene sort of situation here, right? And now we're going to build out the to the pyre mechanic. What happens if if one of the player characters gets snagged? Now, we also need to build out some more in this widow situation where there's a ghost who tries to stop the player characters, and we know that for the level that we're working on, that's a pretty deadly encounter if it goes to combat. So what we'll likely do with this is come up with some sort of other way that the ghost wants to handle this situation, so that it's unlikely to become combat and more likely to become some other sort of encounter. And then we're going to do a simple, straightforward kind of combat encounter for the bard, as there's a series of local thugs who are trying to get the bard's voice back for their own reasons. So we're going to go ahead and pick up where we left off with the priest here. We're going to work on this to the pyre mechanic here, and then I think we're going to talk a little bit about the widow if we have time, and we'll finish up with the bard, as that's going to be the easiest of the elements here to do. And then, of course, we want to do some description as to where the characters find this siren, a little bit of scene setting for ourselves, and what happens when they return victorious. So, let me just remind everybody that this is an interactive stream. So, as you have questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, ideas, opinions, or anything else that you want to talk about, jump in the chat. Let me know. We love that kind of dynamic action in the chat here. And you guys come up with some incredible ideas. You also come up with some really interesting questions and thoughts as we move on in this process here. So, that being said, looks like we've got a couple welcome messages here in the chat. So, welcome everybody. It's good to see Mr. Max, Ben Elder, Jonathan Frost, some of our regulars here. It's um, yeah. So it's great to see you all here every week, every session. So, thank you guys for joining me. Looks like we've already got a post from Jonathan Frost. Says, I believe that the contract states it has to be willing. What about speak with animals with an elderly animal like a venerable giant toad? Well, so that's an interesting point, right? Because your characters might try to game the system, and the siren wants the voice of one of these three NPCs, but they might try to, uh, you know, find somebody else, or find, like you said, an animal or something like that that's willing to give up a voice, something along those lines. We can, debate the morality of that as long as we want, but it's something your characters might do. So something we might work into the return turn here is a little bit of direction on what happens if the characters try to complete this without working in the sort of the letter of what the siren was looking for, what their agreement is. So what happens if they try to trick the siren? So that's certainly something we might want to do. So let's give ourselves a couple headings here. Let's say failure, TBD. Let's say, um, success, TBD, and then let's say um, tricking the siren, TBD. Cool. Yeah, and to Ben Elder's point here, she's going to be mad. Well, yeah, she's going to be mad if she figures it out. We haven't generated a stat block for her yet. We haven't figured out exactly what her ability scores are and what her skills are, and so we're going to have to define that to create a situation in which the characters might try to lie to her. I will admit that that's something that I never really considered early on as a DM was if the what happens if the player characters try to convince their patron that they've completed a quest even though they haven't, and it creates some really interesting situations I found, as you end up in a situation where the players or the characters are having to fabricate some evidence of their success and creates this sort of web of lies that they have to build in which they may get caught in, which can be just as fun as any other kind of social encounter in this. So we're definitely going to want to build that out. I think that's a great idea, Jonathan. So we'll put attack in that, um, and we're going to start with the to the pyre bit here first, just so we can kind of round out what we're to continue to kind of round out what we've already worked on, and then we'll kind of jump topics here, assuming we have time. Ben Elder says, "At last, my voice is restored. What do you think? Isn't it majestic? Right? My gosh, that would be so funny." Um, so, what would happen to with the siren with their laugh? Um, and what would it limit some of her powers? I imagine she has that kind of alluring song thing like harpies do, and having to croak might kind of mitigate that, and that could be interesting. That could be one way that the characters kind of try to take this very morally ambiguous quest and kind of turn it on its head to make it a little more to make themselves a little more of heroes in this situation, instead of just avoiding it outright. So, yeah, great ideas, and anticipating that from your player characters is a good way to be prepared if they kind of throw a curveball at you, as players are wont to do. All right, so this to the pyre mechanic. So with our stat block for these swarm of commoners, we gave them a feature that would allow them to knock down uh, these sort of knockdown NPC or PCs that they do battle with, creatures they do battle with, and then to occupy that creature's space and to carry them away. So the to the pyre mechanic here is kind of building off of that. In my mind. So the idea is this angry mob kind of sweeps over the sweeps over an NPC or a PC that's been knocked down, picks them up and carries them off towards this pyre, which is of course unlit so far because the mob's not going to walk through flames to stick them up there, and the pyre is obviously not going to be right behind them no matter where they are in town. And so we want to come up with a uh, um, we want to come up with a reasonable amount of time that this would take for them to get there, and for the pyre to be lit. So, uh, you know, there are kind of two ways to approach this. Um, is you're kind of coming up with a time in terms of rounds, and the way that I would do this, because it's either going to be a combat or it's going to be a chase, which are both run in initiative order. Uh, the best way to kind of manage the time here to make it easy for yourself is to have things happen within a certain number of rounds. After so many rounds pass, this is triggered. After so many additional rounds pass, this is triggered. And so, for my framework on this, how I would think about it is that once a a player character or any other creature is picked up by the swarm of commoners, that there's so many rounds that it takes them to get them to this unlit pyre, and then so many rounds it takes to get the pyre lit, right? So, and there's kind of two ways that you can think about this when you're doing this sort of thing. You can think about it in terms of real time, with effectively one round occupying 6 seconds of real time, um, which means that you may end up with, if it takes 5 minutes, that's what, 50 rounds that the characters have to do that. And yet, 5 minutes is a pretty reasonable amount of time for kind of picking them up and getting it back to the town square or something like that. Um, Yet, it's going to feel like an eternity when you're running this in initiative order. So, the other thing that you can do is come up with a reasonable number of rounds and not really worry about the time that it takes in sort of in game, really. So coming up with, like, maybe it's 5 rounds, which is really kind of 30 seconds, right? Um, but that feels less like a drag to your players because time gets stretched out so much when you're in initiative order. So I think that that's kind of a better route to go with, especially because you can consider time to be pretty flexible within the initiative order sort of setup here, if you really need to. Let's see here. Ben Elder says maybe they have a magic furnace type of pyre, soot blackened stone, and a metal stake. Arcane device only needs a command to light one round. A dark reminder of the Inquisition's history in town. You know what? That's an interesting point. That would be there. I kind of think personally that, considering that the priest is one of his secret is he's hiding his previous affiliation with the Inquisition. That if they've been abolished, and that's such a shameful thing, that the town's probably wiped away many of the reminders of that. However, we did talk about how his deity, the Gray Lady, um, is has a lantern as her symbol, and that her priests carry this lantern on a pole of some kind to as a kind of a mark of office. So instead of this magical furnace being kind of an Inquisition sort of thing, maybe it's more tied to kind of this current deity of the Gray Lady and her lantern, and so it's also kind of it's something that they can use in this situation, but is perhaps not normally used for burning people at the stake, since that's kind of an Inquisition sort of thing. Typically, I would imagine. But it would still give us a quick pyre and allow them to light several pyres quickly. Now, that being said, we probably want to add a little bit of time to get the flames going, because we want to give the player characters, the opportunity to escape captivity. We're not trying to kill them outright. We're trying to give them a challenge that is severe enough that they feel pressed, they feel the danger, but they can overcome. There are ways out of it. So one of the ways we can do that in this is to give them a little bit of time, especially since this is probably going to be a pretty high damage sort of situation if they get caught in this burning inferno. Um, so let's get started here by kind of defining how long this takes. So let's say any, let's see here. Oop, let's fold that. Swarm of commoners who restrain a creature can, or should say carry that, let's say carry their target to the town square and the pyres being set up there. The journey takes, I'd say we pick somewhere in between 3 and 5 rounds for this. Maybe we'll cut the difference and say 4 rounds. Again, if you kind of if you're kind of thinking about how long combat takes, or I should say anything in initiative order takes when you're running the game, 3 rounds can be a long time. So maybe we, let's see here. Maybe we make this 3 rounds to start, and we consider lengthening that if we need to. Frankly, what I would do as a DM running this is I would start with a shorter number of rounds, just in case the player characters really kind of coalesce and they come together and they really knock this out of the park, knowing that I can always adjust the length of the rounds as needed. So if I can add a 4th or 5th round if they're really kind of flailing or they're all very far away or that kind of thing. So let's say the journey takes 3 rounds to complete. Once at the pyres, the target creature is bound to stake within 1 round, and the fire is lit on the subsequent round. The flames take 2 turns or 2 rounds to grow hot enough to threaten the target. Any target caught in the pyre after, which is any target who starts its turn in the pyre on subsequent rounds takes, let's figure out how much damage. This is a big flame here, right? And so this is more than just, whacking somebody with a torch, which is, like 1d6 kind of damage, right? This is a serious amount of damage here. And so this is the kind of thing where I would go to the improvised damage tables. in the 2024 DMG, which handily enough are on the back of the DM screen here, which I really appreciate. Um, and you know, one of these things on here, for example, is stumbling into a fire pit. Is 2d10 damage per round effectively. Um, as opposed to being submerged in lava being 18d10 per round. Or wading through lava being 10d10 per round. And so, what we'll probably do, especially since these are second level characters that we're dealing with, is we'll probably, do this at 2d10 per round because that's still pretty significant damage. On average, that's going to be 11 points of damage every round, which means that they've probably got one round to get out before they go down. And then, since they're taking damage every turn, they're automatically failing their death saving throws, right? So there's going to be a very limited amount of time that they can survive in there, unless the other player characters do something about it. So let's see here. So let's put that in here. It takes 2d10 fire damage per round. It starts to turn the pyre on, so it was rounds, 2d5 per damage. Target can slip their bonds with a DC, and we'll decide the DC in a second here. With a DC, strength, athletics, or dexterity. Cannot spell today. Dexterity, there we go. Dexterity, acrobatics, check. And so this is the kind of thing where I would set the DC fairly high. Simply because we are, they've had some rounds to try to get out of this mob, try to escape for themselves. They've had a round while they're being bound to the pyre or being bound to the stake. We've had a couple rounds that it's taken for the heat to kind of grow to the point where they're not really taking any fire damage to the 7th round of this, right? And so that's a pretty significant amount of time in in an initiative order situation. So I frankly would make this DC either an 18 or a 20, and make it high, because if they haven't escaped to this point, it's only going to get harder, right? So yeah, I'd make it a 20. Ben Elder says 20 to 25 depending on the character level. Yeah, you could do that. I try to save 25 for some really Herculean kind of stuff. Because it is it's a hard DC to hit, especially for second level characters here. That being said, 20 is still pretty high for second level characters. This is still pretty tough, but we've given them lots of opportunities at this point to escape. And the nice thing about this, the reason we want to give them lots of opportunities to escape, is that it just tells a better story, right? It's going to be a more dramatic moment if they're caught and almost dragged to the pyre and manage to escape just at the last moment. It's going to feel more cinematic for them. It's going to feel more rewarding because there was this threat of being burned alive, and now all of a sudden they've managed to escape it. And so that's kind of how I would run this, how I would kind of keep that in mind here. Now, of course, all this stuff is dependent on the characters that your PCs are playing with, right? If if they've rolled, for example, if you've let them roll ability scores as opposed to using the standard array, and they've all kind of rolled up these superhero characters, yeah, you might want to bump up the DC on this to make it harder. If they've all kind of rolled sort of low level character, very kind of low attribute characters, or or they are nerfed in some other sort of arena, you might want to drop the DC a little bit here. Um, but bear in mind that what you don't want to do is get a character to this point and then pull your punches, right? So, if a character is unable to escape and they end up at the pyre and they're taking this damage and they go down and they're continuing to burn and the rest of the party isn't able to save them or isn't interested in saving them. Um, so uh, the you know you want to hit them with this. You want to show that there are consequences to this. You don't want to just come up with a sort of a Deus ex machina sort of situation where the character is saved through no action of any of the players. Um, a little bit of character death can be really good for a party. It's something that took me a long time to learn as a DM. That in a lot of cases, your player characters or your players there really enjoy the challenge and recognize how significant it is when a character goes down, right? So you don't want to do it all the time. You don't want to make it like an every session kind of thing, but don't shy away from using it, especially when you've given uh, the player characters lots of opportunities to kind of escape their fate. Ben Elder says, very true. I guess I'm traumatized from min-maxed rogue multi-class characters. Yeah, if you got a bunch of min-maxers at your table, absolutely adjust this. But this is all kind of uh, overall. This is made for kind of an average party here, and every adventure is. So you want to kind of tailor it to the people at your table specifically. T3S5, hey, welcome to the stream. Thanks for joining us today. Good to have you here. Um, all right. Mr. Mech says, is the pyre made out of assassin vines? Oh, come on. You guys survived that encounter. You're fine. Mr. Mex is in my Tomb of Annihilation campaign, and at second level, they had a very dicey interaction with some assassin vines. Um, but everybody's fine. It all worked out. Okay, so anyway, that's our to the pyre mechanic here in kind of rough terms. Good enough for us to run with. So now I want to talk about the widow here, where we came up with this idea for this widow who um, is feeling guilty about the death of their spouse because they made this wish that they would stop sailing and for good, and now they're feeling that they feel guilty because their spouse died at sea. They feel like it's a twisted manifestation of their wish, and they're also being haunted, kindly haunted, by by the ghost of their spouse, and who is going to come to their aid if the characters convince the widow to give up her voice. Now, for a party of 4 second level characters, which is likely the level that the party is going to be at this juncture. Um, the We don't know for sure because it is so sandboxing, so open ended here, but most likely that's where they're going to be at this point. We uh, uh, we got to recognize that a ghost is an incredibly deadly foe in a D&D stat block. And since we don't want to just turn this into a TPK because we can turn it into a TPK, um, we probably want the ghost to use other means to recover this voice, the voice of their loved one. And so we have this idea where they attempt to possess a PC, and we kind of went with they confront the party, resorting to violence if needed. But I'm thinking maybe they try to possess one of the PCs and maybe try to steal the contract and run away with it. Um, and uh, the Yeah, so that kind of gives us a situation where we're using the Ghost stat block to its fullest. We're not nerfing it, but at the same time, we are creating a survivable but still challenging sort of encounter for the player characters. Um, because gosh, how do what do you do if you're chasing down a ghost that's possessed one of your allies? It's not like you can, damage the body. You can't kill your friend just to kick the ghost out of them. I mean, you could, but it's, that's a pretty heavy decision to make. So I think let's modify this. So let's say that they attempt to possess a PC, and uh, let's change this to and steal the contract. Once the contract is in hand, they attempt to slink off and return the voice to their beloved. All right, so that's a little bit different. And now that I word it that way, I can visualize a situation where this isn't like a straight chase scene, right? Where it's not like the ghost tracks them down in the middle of the uh, you know middle of the street and possesses one of them and has them go, "Oh, I've got the contract," and runs down the street and they've got to turn back. It can be stealthier than that. Maybe invading one of them early on and having to pretend to be that character. Uh, you know, uh, uh, Posing as one of the player characters until it's the evening and they have the opportunity to slink in and steal that contract and then try to disappear into the night. And so now we end up in a situation where the player characters have the opportunity to realize that one of them is possessed, that have that kind of the one of them's an imposter kind of thing. Um, and if they miss that, then now they've got to track them down in the night, and kind of steal their friend back as well as the contract. And there's a case that they're going to lose that, and now they might have to go to one of the other NPCs and try to do this all over again. Um, and so, what we might say, uh, we might mention in here real quick to make this not deadly is we might say the ghost uses. We might say the ghost uses any non-violent means at its disposal. Okay. So Jonathan Frost says, oh, I'm sorry, let's back up here. So T3, S5, nice to meet you, Tess. Thanks for, again, thanks for joining us. Good to have you here. And then Jonathan Ross says, the possessed PC is permanently tied up and renamed Bitey. I mean, I feel like that's more zombie sort of, but hey, you can go with it. Why not? Ben Elder says, maybe it could work like a concentration check. Maybe the possessed takes damage, needs to maintain concentration, 3 fails, and the spirit is evicted. Yeah, you could absolutely run it like that. And that's something I might do if the player characters or if the players collectively just kind of go, well, I guess we're gonna have to sacrifice our buddy, so let's just keep attacking them. And I might run it that way, just to not end up in a situation where you end up with one player at the table whose character was just effectively murdered by the other players, because that's going to create a lot of discontent and some tension at the table. So might run it that way. Otherwise, if the if the players are coming up with really kind of innovative ways to perhaps overcome this possession, and maybe they're, I don't know, maybe they capture their possessed buddy and drag them off, and they research rituals to expel a ghost. We can come up with something like that on the fly, and give them some arcana checks or something along those lines to figure it out, or religion checks or what have you. So, we want to give ourselves some room for really creative play here, and to kind of, make the give ourselves the possibilities to be open to really kind of interesting stories and interactions, knowing that we can, kind of come up with some of these checks on the fly. Um, uh, Ben Elder says, and I think in response to the sneaky possession, that he likes that, and the dreaded subtle message to one player. Yeah, one of the reasons that I like playing online, especially with Discord, is that the other players don't know when you're passing notes, right? So there's no situation where you write out a note, you roll it up, you hand it to a player, and everybody else is going, "Oh my goodness, what does that say? They've got a secret now. We've got to figure out what the secret is." Instead, you can just do a message to one of the other players, and nobody is the wiser. I think making that a really kind of cool dynamic at the table where it really is a secret. Now, that being said, this again is something that you're going to want to run by your table early in session zero, and that seeing kind of what their feeling is on PvP and that sort of thing. And what their feeling is about players having secrets from the other players. Because if that's just kind of a no go, then you don't want to necessarily do that. You want to modify this potentially, and you instead of a ghost, use a specter or use a shadow or something along those lines to change it if you need to. But as long as everybody's cool with a little bit of playful PvP, um, then then yeah, this is a cool way to do this. I think an interesting way that opens us up to a lot of creative stories. Cool. So that one's knocked out. Now we go to the easy one, where we are just kind of creating I'll say a basic combat encounter. That being said, I really don't like to just create, throw together a combat encounter that has no other kind of difficulties or challenges to it, because I think that really that gets overused a lot. You do that too often, and combat becomes very repetitive, which I think is where a lot of people kind of fall out with combat. Is it can, if you're not careful, it can feel the same every single time, and we don't want it to. We want it to be a little bit different. So um, let's kind of review what we came up with here and see if we kind of get some inspiration from that. Um, all right, so the tavern where the bard normally performs is frequently host to an underworld gang boss who has become particularly fond of the bard and their singing. When the bard gives up their voice, the tavern owner realizes it will upset this gang boss, who to whom he owes money. Um, let's clean up that sentence. He owes money, uh, and sends some local thugs to waylay the party and get the voice back. Okay, cool. So we can already kind of guess that this is probably an ambush sort of situation here, where we have a situation where these thugs are laying a trap for the player characters in some sense. So we have some premeditation to this encounter, which means that our thugs are probably prepared for this, and so they probably have some kind of advantage up their sleeve. And we want to figure out what that is. We don't need to make it too terribly complicated or too terribly difficult, um, but we want to add it to the combat encounter to really kind of adjust this. So what I would think on this to give it a little bit of oomph is, instead of making this a low difficulty encounter, um, but not make it a high difficulty encounter, I think we make it a moderate encounter, which is where I tend to default for these encounters. But that being said, it is worthwhile putting some low level encounters in your world too, to just give yourself some of that variation, some of that rise and fall. So let's go ahead and outline this. Let's see here. Encounter. Okay. So again, we're just kind of, we're doing this very basically. We figured out kind of what our XP budget is for these encounters using the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide. And we've, for this level character for this group, these level characters, this group, we're looking at about 600 XP. So on another screen over here, I've got D&D Beyond up, as I do, and we're gonna kind of figure out what sort of stat blocks might work for this. And so the 2024 Monster Manual did away with the standard Thug stat block, and they changed it to the Tough, if I'm recalling correctly. Yeah, the Tough. which frankly I think is a better name for it. Makes me feel like a 1920s PI whenever I say it. Um, that one is these guys are one half CR. That's 100 XP apiece. So you'll be looking at a gang of maybe six of them, which is frankly kind of what we is kind of the size that we might want for a group that's trying to overpower and um, the it's trying to overpower and prey on these PCs, right? Um, and so that works for me. I think that's a pretty straightforward one there. There's also now a tough boss, but that's a 4 CR. That's above what we're looking for here. So we probably don't want to do that. Um, so let's use the toughs here. That's pretty simple. That's six of them, and we can roll with that. Let's see here. We got a couple other comments. I love how nice you guys are to each other in the chat. That's very refreshing to me. Um, Jonathan Frost, does the siren know of a secret name for Evander and Orin? I'm sorry, Orin or Aquan. Is that why the siren lost her voice? Is Evander responsible? We've talked about that a little bit, and we kind of had, if I recall correctly, we kind of brainstormed that one of the powers of the siren is that she's able to manipulate the weather, which is in direct conflict um, to to Evander in this world. And so that might be a cool way to kind of tie this in. It also might be a cool way to bring the siren back into the adventure, which is really nice because we spent so much time building her out as an NPC. We don't want that to be kind of a one and done thing. So I really like that idea. There's also a cool magic item in Shadow Dark that is the true name of a thing. And when you know something's true name, you have advantage over influencing it, advantage on attacking it, and it has disadvantage on attacking you, and then disadvantage on resisting influences um, uh, to to influence player characters. I've always kind of thought that's really cool because you get a lot of fiction in there where he talks about the power of true names, um, and I I think it could be a cool weakness for Ovander if we know his true name. So let's pop that in here. Um, as we're rounding him out, weakness. Um, those who know Ovander's true name have some power over him. Um, and the cool thing about your idea here, Jonathan, is having this siren know the true name is information that she can hold over the party later, because she's not a kind entity. Right? She's not the kind that's just going to be like, "Oh, this will help you. Here's the information." It's something that she can try to extort them with later, which again makes her a little more sinister, leads to more role play and more kind of challenging situations, and brings her back into the story. I like that idea. I like that idea a lot. Mr. Mex has called them hooligans. Yeah, hooligans is a good one. Hoods is another one of my favorite ones from 1920s PI fiction. I don't know why I like it so much, but I do. Let's see here. Ben Elder says the building the party is sleeping in is locked instead of blaze. They get out, but the doors and windows are locked. Watch, maybe thugs try to stop them. Get out, burn, but run if most of the party gets out. Yeah, we could do it that way in terms of a kind of a biker gang kind of deal. We've all seen sort of movies where gangs and biker gangs kind of do that, and maybe that works. Maybe that's what we want to do here. Um, let's you know the only thing that would make me hesitant to that is we already kind of have a fire hazard in the priest here. And I wouldn't want this to end up in a situation where it feels kind of like the quantum ogre scenario, right? Where, yes, the characters have a choice, but that choice ultimately leads to effectively the same kind of interaction. Because that can feel very false to your players, especially if they go to the bard and they fail this encounter, and their contract gets stolen back, and now they got to go to the priest and they run off, and it's another thing where they're trying to be burnt alive. Um, it can feel like repetition. That's my only hesitation to that. Otherwise, it's a really good tactic, and it's something that would create a really dynamic interaction for the players. So something we maybe want to hold on to, especially since we've got plenty of kinds of gangs of hooligans and and toughs and hoods and what have you throughout this world. Um, so let's actually add that to our running kind of commentary on things we might want to use. So we're going to say hooligans burn down the building in which the PCs are staying, but first lock all doors and windows. Um, Now, of course, you're going to end up in a situation where the window's locked, but uh, the player character throws them through, throws himself through the window and what have you. Real quick, hey Tess, thanks for joining us. I hope you'll see us again on Wednesday when we continue the stream. Um, Good having you here. Thanks for joining us. Um, but yeah, so we end up in that kind of, but that's a cool dynamic sort of moment there. Also, this doesn't work if the characters are staying outside of a building of some kind, if they're camping rough, that kind of deal. So it's something I think it's cool to work in. We're just going to have to be particular about where we do. So let's see here. Um, let's jumping back to kind of our point here. We're going to say 6 toughs ambush the PCs as they attempt to leave town. So one of the cool things I think we can do with this too is we put the bard in the sodden hearth, right? That underground settlement that we're building here, which means there's probably a bottleneck of places where they can leave town because there's only so many tunnels up to the surface. Which means that we can end up in a situation where these toughs set up an ambush in one of those spots. We could say there are only so many tunnels to the surface, which creates convenient bottlenecks and funnels the PCs into this trap. So we have that in there going for us. We can figure out what other kinds of things maybe these toughs have done to kind of turn the tables in their favor. Maybe they have set up pit traps, or they've set up other kinds of traps for this to kind of stop up the PCs. Maybe they have ooh. Okay, maybe I'm just thinking too much in the vein of Star Wars here, but there's that in Return of the Jedi where the Ewoks make those that trap out of logs, and it takes down the ATST, and by kind of smashing it. Well, what if we have a trap in here that the toughs have sort of set up where it's full barrels that come swinging down from the sides, trying to hit the the player characters as part of this combat here, as part of the situation. So that could be interesting. If you guys have other ideas for traps, I'd love to hear them. but I like kind of this idea of they've set up uh, the um, they have set up this situation to be as favorable for them as possible. Um, so Ben Elder says maybe an archer crouched in the shadows, ready to surprise with a rogue style sneak attack. Um, Another solid idea to use at certain points here. I would be a little concerned um, that that would deal so much damage that you might one shot one of the party members here, and really kind of not give them any opportunity to escape, which is a tough situation to be in. It creates a lot of panic, and it can be useful to use it from time to time, but I don't know that this is necessarily the place for it. Now that being said, certainly attacking from the shadows with advantage, 100%. And the fact that toughs get pack tactics is really useful here. Um, so let's see here. Jonathan Frost says trapdoors. Ooh, that's a really interesting idea because it also would add some maneuverability to this. So maybe there are trapdoors in this bottleneck that the toughs use to kind of move in and out, and they're concealed. And so it gives them the ability to kind of attack and disappear, but it also gives the player characters the ability to start noticing these and use some of the trapdoors for their own advantage. It's a good way. That's a really good way to use terrain, and uh, the yeah, maybe to use terrain to create a dynamic situation. Ben Elder says, "Oh, maybe a strategic stalactite that could fall on the party." Yeah, yeah, we could do that, especially since we're underground. That's kind of thematic. Um, and then Mr. Mech says, "Covered pits in the roads." Yeah, that's another good idea that we could do that there. It would be something that delays and restricts the character movement without necessarily doing a whole lot of damage, but it kind of puts them in a situation where now they can be more easily overwhelmed. And Ben Elder says, in regard to the stalactite, um, it's like the Ewok log, but more subterranean. Yeah, I agree with you on that. It's a little more on theme. I like that idea. I like that idea. So the question we should probably be asking ourselves at this point, and I think I have an answer to it, but we should be considering it, is there are multiple purposes to a trap. Some of them are to do damage and injure. Some of them are to kill. Some of them are simply to restrain or impede. And I kind of feel like at this level, we're looking for a trap that restrains or impedes if we want to work a physical trap into this. Um, that being said, if we're going to play this on a strategic map, if you have a map set up for tactical movement, um, the uh, uh, the trapdoor idea from Jonathan Frost is a really cool one. If you don't, having covered pit traps in the road is an easy one. Like Mr. Mech suggests, is an easy one to kind of theater the mind by simply having there be a check every time a character moves so far, and having the toughs be immune to this because they know where the traps are, that kind of thing. Um, so um, because let's see here. Ben Elder also says maybe some of the thugs have bottles filled with sleep potion, Baldur's Gate style, to throw at the party. Yeah, they could have that too. They could have that too. Um, kind of the boss wants a word with you sort of thing. Um, yeah, that could be interesting because if we decide we want to go in that direction, now we're coming up with a capture mechanic, right? Where the characters have the opportunity to, they're captured and they have to escape from this, which is certainly something that we could use. Um, hmm. I think for the sake of what we're doing here, I personally like the covered pits in the road option the best. Although these are all cool things that we could be using at different points. Um, I think I like it here the best because it's easy for us to use with the map or theater of the mind, and it adds some complications to this combat without making it too mechanically heavy, especially since we've got a couple heavy mechanic. We have a heavy mechanic interaction with the priest and that kind of stuff, and so it lowers the burden on the DM in terms of reading through this and kind of knowing the various pieces and parts of this. So let's go with that. Let's say there are only so many tunnels to the surface, creates convenient bottlenecks and funnels the PCs into this trap. And we'll say the tunnel is loaded with small concealed pit traps to capture and restrain the PCs. And I say concealed again here because maybe it's something that the characters can notice with a quality perception check, or with a passive perception check. We may decide they're hidden and they're not. I would think that in the amount of time that they had to make these, that they're probably concealed as opposed to hidden. But that's debatable. The tunnel is loaded with small concealed pit traps that capture and restrain the DCs. PCs must succeed let's say a DC. Since there's a lot of these, I kind of say a DC 13. Wisdom perception check anytime they moved 10 feet or more through the space or fall into one of these 10-foot pits. That's probably generally good enough for this at the moment here. And with that, we've kind of rounded out these encounter success challenges, which is good because we've been working on it for a little while. So we can kind of put this to bed and finish up the last bits and pieces of the Sea Shanty Siren encounter on Wednesday, hopefully. So with that, we are at our time. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up here just real quick. We got a couple last comments in the chat here. Mr. Mex says, "Did this smell like chloroform?" I'll be honest with you. I've always wanted to kind of pull that in a the characters are in a tavern or something like that, and they don't realize that kind of everybody in the tavern's in on this, and somebody comes up and, "Excuse me, can you help me with something? Does this smell like chloroform?" And they put it in their face. But that would be super cool. That would be a funny thing to do, I think, at some point. Cool. All right. So with that, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been wonderful to have all of you here. If you enjoy this stream, please like, subscribe, leave a comment. All that stuff helps the channel grow, gets more people into the chat, and creates a nice dynamic, chat like we've got going here that you all create every session for us here. So thank you for that. If you ever want to jump into one of my tables, please feel free to check me out at startplaying.games/GM/RJ and there, or click the link in the description of this video. And there you can see all of my my open online games for the moment, but there's also that custom game request button on there that allows you to reach out to me if there's a different module you want to run, if you're looking for a homebrew campaign, if you want something that's there, but you want to run it at a different time, on a different day, or you're looking for a one-shot or what have you, you can send requests through there, and I'm more than happy to work with you to come up with the game that fits you best. So with that, thank you all for such a wonderful stream, and I will see you all again on Wednesday. Talk to you then. Have a good one.